Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to have Noam Wasserman, who is the Dean of the SciSims School of Business. Did I get the pronunciation of SciSims right?
You nailed it.
Awesome. At Yeshiva University. And kind enough to join us today to talk a little bit about lessons that we can learn from startups for everyday life. Before I get to the bio, Noam, just wanted to say thank you again for joining us and sharing your time to help our audience.
No, it's my pleasure, Matt. Thank you so much for asking. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to spend more time with you.
Yeah, so Noam's for those who are not familiar with his work, he's before becoming dean in 2019, was a professor of entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School and also a chaired professor and founding director at USC. He's written a couple of books that are geared towards a wider audience, and one that I read recently, and really when I read it, I was excited that Noam agreed to come on here, is Life is a Startup: What Founders Can Teach Us About Making Choices and Managing Change. Would highly recommend it. I actually listened to the Audible version. The audiobook is wonderful. I don't know if you knew who read that for you, but the audiobook is really engaging on that.
No, I've never even listened to that part, and so you've done more than I have already.
I suppose once you write it out, you probably don't want to listen to your own work anymore. I thought the book was amazing, and so highly recommend. We'll put a link in the description for everybody here to pick up a copy. So the book discusses how lessons from founders and entrepreneurs can extend to life decisions, which I thought was pretty powerful. I was wondering if might tell our audience, what do you think is one of the bigger lessons or one of the biggest lessons that somebody could take from how founders approach decisions and apply it to one of their own decisions in life?
So the biggest picture, if I were to capture it in a single line, to me, it's my favorite quote from dear departed Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. Follow your heart, but check it with your head. For founders, we celebrate the instinctive entrepreneur. We celebrate the gut level decisions. Unfortunately, those, especially in the people arena, who you're going to involve and how to involve them in your venture, those are the biggest reasons for failure. If you look at the biggest reasons for why startups have a high failure rate, it's because of the people, the interpersonal, and the other things that go into not making those decisions well. And it's because of following your heart unchecked by your head. And so being able to understand where in life we have to pull back on the reins, not just default to the gut, not just default to what seems right, and instead injecting in a little bit more forethought, a little bit more of the rational to be able to complement it. And this is particularly important because there are a lot of human biases that heighten risk and failure built into anyone, not just founders, but any person out there when it comes to relationships that we tap and the things that we're doing, when it comes to the avoidance of difficult conversations. No one likes to have conflict-ridden discussions and are avoiding them. It comes at our peril, and we can learn that. And a lot of the solutions that they have, like founders face difficult conversations more often than we do. They face a lot of these things like in the crucible of pressure. And so whereas we can just put Band-Aids on it or just bypass it if it comes up every couple of weeks, they have to find solutions, sometimes counterintuitive ones. And so that's why we have to be able to learn from them. What are the biases? And then what are the things that the successful ones are able to get past that? There's a natural inclination that sociologists called homophily, birds of a feather flocking together. That's great socially. When you're doing that, it happens to be death within startups for reasons. If you want, we can delve into that. The passion and confidence that everyone celebrates in founders and how those become your Achilles heel because you're only looking at rosy scenarios and not game planning around what happens when we hit bumps in the road and other things like that. Those are the bunch of the natural human inclinations that if we can bring the head to those heart decisions, much more able to succeed as people, as founders in any walk of life that we go into.
What you say is interesting in the sense that in society, the people who really do go for it and then succeed are held up, or they did stick with their convictions and probably did follow their heart and they jumped in. But thinking with your head, if you're if a group of people are very excited about it, they're all likely to give the same, oh yes, you should absolutely go for it. Having a different group around you may lead to some more grounded advice, I would assume, or more well-rounded advice on the odds of success on a particular venture.
Yeah, no, one of the other things they are highlighting, the natural inclination to over extrapolate from the outliers. So you can see as someone who has a smashing success, that is the game plan for how to be that. And a lot of times, either there was a lot more to the story than you know, or that was truly an outlier and it's not going to be the norm that you're going to be able to get to there. So for instance, a lot of people seize on Mark Zuckerberg and, this is the outlier, about how to do it. Why did the movie Social Network, I know you like a lot of the pop culture references and things like that. Why did the movie Social Network exist? It's because he blew it on a classic founding decision about how to split the ownership, how to split the equity with his co-founder. Eduardo Severin ended up with a bigger stake than Zuck wanted him to have. He tried to wrestle it back from him and ended up with legal proceedings over it. That is not the recipe to succeed. You should be learning how to avoid those pitfalls, not taking the chance of running up to the edge of a cliff and hoping that you're going to be the 1 in 1,000 that doesn't go plunging off the edge of it.
No, and that's fascinating, and that kind of leads into another question that I had in mind. So if you're starting up a venture, right? Everybody when they're starting up anything would love to be as successful as Facebook, whether it's a business or whether it's a relationship or whether it's jumping into, whatever it is they're going to jump into, some sort of, a real estate deal, whatever it is. What advice might you have? Clearly, it's important to think carefully about long run arrangements, but what advice might you have for individuals who are entering into an arrangement just from the very beginning, in terms of thinking through what happens if this is truly successful?
Well, one of the key parts of it is educating yourself about the roadmaps. So one of them is the roadmap of yourself, having to gain the self-awareness about you, your biases, your weaknesses, and being able to be very conscious of that. It's not a natural thing that people are tuned into that early on, and being able to make sure they have the roadmap of yourself. And then there's the roadmap of the venture, the roadmap of where is the startup likely to go. If you've never founded, it's understandable that you don't know what are the key skills you're going to need to have, the contacts you need to have, the ways in which those will change over time as the venture is changing very quickly. Like, it's understandable that you won't have it, but you are going to be diving in without getting that roadmap at your peril. And so being able to, in the Jewish liturgy, there's something in Hebrew, it's called Sof Ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. When you're going to be acting later, put in thought ahead of time. Be able to educate yourself about the roadmap ahead. And so whether it is learning about it by taking a class that captures like the best practices that we've been able to learn around founding, whether it is that you go and work for someone else in a startup first before you try to found yourself, whether it's you find your own personal board of advisors and include on it a founder who's been a couple of steps ahead of you. All of these things are where you have to do your due diligence on it. You have to be able to understand what you're getting yourself into, what are the early skills that are going to be needed, and how are they going to change 6 months out? How can you be able to better prepare and give a lot of the most important founding decisions come pre-founding, come in the foundation building stage, come in the preparation, and that's what sets the table for how well you're going to be able to do that. And a lot of times, once you dive in, the short-term pressures of founding are going to be particularly intense. And so it's going to be harder for you to think clearly at that point, for you to be able to keep the learning going at a fast enough rate to be able to keep up with the rocket ship that hopefully is going to be what your venture turns into. It's actually why a lot of founders end up getting replaced, because it's outstripped their ability to learn. They didn't prepare enough for it. In fact, this is my earliest research was on the paradox of entrepreneurial success. That if you think about large company CEOs, that when they succeed, they're about as entrenched as you can get. You're not going to see them changed unless they want to step down. A lot of the most successful early founders that I studied were the fastest to be changed. And that's because the rocket ship meant that their skills were outstripped the fastest, and the rate of growth was too fast for them to be able to keep up when it comes to the rate of learning and other things like that. And so a bunch of those things around being better prepared. If you are going to be founding eventually, using the blessing of time to be able to prepare on the way to it. If you wait until the last minute, the day before you found, to start preparing, too late. Being able to have that solid foundation on which to build is the key piece of it.
The subset of people who would be exceptional CEOs of major organizations, it's a low percentage of the population, right? And the subset of people in the population who would be stunningly successful founders and be able to take something from the ground up and create it would also be a very low percentage. And I'm sure there's a little bit of overlap. Some people could do both in there, but there's a very good reason to think that many individuals who are incredibly successful at getting something started and off the ground and into this amazing organization are not the same ones to run the organization on a day-to-day level once it gets going.
No, absolutely. And that is one of the key things about the self-awareness to tune into. Am I a starter or am I a scaler? And those oftentimes are radically different skills. It's very few people who can do both well. And also very few people, even fewer, who are going to like doing both. And so being able to tune into, at this point, the pains of being a CEO have gotten too much for me and it's not fitting my sweet spot. Let me hand off the reins to someone for whom it's the sweet spot and the interest. And I will be better deployed by society if I then head on to the next venture that I'm going to be creating, because that's a lot more of my sweet spot. So everyone gains. The person who can scale couldn't have founded, couldn't have been the originator, but also the person who started it, much better possibly for them to be able to be freed up to be able to do the next thing and be able to get back to the magic of the early days.
No, good points. And once again, very good segue into the next question. So if you have, we talked about CEOs, and a few CEOs I know do listen to the channel and appreciate them, but most people aren't CEOs. But plenty of people face decisions of when to stay in a current position or try something new, or perhaps to try between a couple of different positions, trying a couple of different options. And I know that you had decision, and you write about it in Life as a Startup, about being at Harvard. It's a tough position to leave tenured professorship at Harvard. Not very many people do. I really appreciated the term, and I'm sure it's common there, but I hadn't heard it. Crimson handcuffs, I believe, was the phrase that you used. What are some questions that would be good for people to ask themselves when considering whether to leave a position and try something new, or whether to stay? So
I would frame it in some ways as the simplest of all of the frameworks that I teach my students, that I tend to use myself and things like that. 3 single syllable words: need, can, and want. And so finding out where there is a real need in the world, especially if people are going to be willing to pay you to do it. Where's the can, the capabilities, where do those lie? And the want, what do you really want to do? What are you driven to do, and things like that. And so tuning into, for instance, let's take the last part of them. What makes you tick? Is it the prestige? Is it the crimson that's on your business card and on the website? Is it impact that you want to have? And maybe you're actually bottled up in where you are, even if it's a very prestigious job. Do you want the freedom to be able to follow your own ideas? To be able to create something brand new that maybe you're bottled up, not being able to do it. Just examples of, what might be some of the common wants and other things like that. Am I getting that where I am right now? Can it happen elsewhere? Can it happen better in the elsewhere? And so those are some of the things to be taking a look at. One of the other things, so this is going back probably about a decade, at Harvard, one of my students in the Founders Dilemmas course, she'd written a paper that had one line in it that I just stared at, and had all sorts of, and I ended up putting up a copy of it on my wall. And to give you a little bit of background, it was her reflection on when she was working before coming back to business school. Okay. And what the quote was, along the lines of, it is really easy to get stuck in a rut, especially if you're good at what you do. And essentially, she had picked a path for herself and was plowing down that path. And then she had a failure at work, the lightning bolt from above, that said to her, think about it. Don't continue on autopilot like is the natural human inclination. Is this the best way for you to have an impact? Are there better ways that you might be able to have it? She realized there's a better fit for my skills elsewhere. And she wanted to shift gears, realize the need to retool, go back to grad school. And that's how she had ended up coming to the business school. And the more that we can be able to see the signals, the way in which we had bumps in the road as being a signal to put up the periscope, look around. Is this what makes me tick? Is this the best fit for the impact I want to have on the world? Those are the best times to be able to see whether this is the time to shift gears or not.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty powerful That's a really powerful quote. And a good question people should ask themselves regularly. Those who value that, I hope everybody who tunes in, whether you're religious or not, thinks about like, what's your impact on the world, and how do you make the best impact on the world? The idea of don't just go on autopilot when you're good at your job, which is the easiest time to go on autopilot. That's a great quote, and really good tips for people to think about as they're approaching those decisions, which everybody has those at various points in their career, thinking about what is the right next step.
Yeah, it also goes to the entrepreneurial mindset a bit, where have a plan that you've thought about and developed, but be open to the unexpected. Be open to, God's hand coming down and saying, no, go to the left instead of the right. Rethink about where you are going there. And if you get too much blindered on that path, you're going to be stuck in the rut and not be able to get out of it. If you're open to it, that you can evaluate, some of them you'll reject and you'll say, no, this is where I want to have the impact. It's not going to be better at that other one. Once in a while, you'll find magic. You'll find a better fit for you when it comes to all three of the, about the need, the can, and the want.
Need, the can, and the want. That's fantastic. Your book, Founder's Dilemma, also talks more on like a household level. And I thought was pretty fascinating as well, to take thoughts of entrepreneurship and startup. And I'm an economist by training, so saw some of these tie-ins. So there's a debate in economics about equality versus efficiency, specifically thinking on income. So if you would like more income equality, there would be a price tag for that. That price tag would be the overall efficiency of what can be produced in a country. So there's this debate about equality versus efficiency. And you touched on it a bit. I'm hoping to kind of get your thoughts for our audience on how does the idea of equality versus efficiency translate into, say, decisions in a household?
Sure. So let's start off in the founding arena, and then we can then extend it into the other one. In terms of the most important early decisions that founders make, there are three that the research shows are the most fateful at being able to separate success, failure, stability, instability of the team, other things like that. Those three are what we call the 3 R's. And they actually happen to map each of them to a different discipline in terms of the grounding in it. Yeah. First of the R's is the relationships. The second of the R's is the roles and decision-making. And the third of the R's is the rewards. And so the relationships part, that's where social psychology comes in and very solidly grounded in that part of it. The roles in decision-making, the sociology and the overall structure and how it affects things, the roles and the decisions, et cetera, that you're making. And then the third of the R's is the microeconomics in a lot of ways, the rewards. That's where we're seeing a bunch of the ways that we might be able to learn about Okun's, equality, efficiency, and trade-offs and other things like that. So within those founding teams, what do you think is the most common of the ways that they split the equity within the team?
It's 50-50. I read the book, but I think many people will guess it's got to be 50-50. It's just the simplest. Yeah, we'll start it up. We'll just split the profits, of course.
It's the 1/n rule. It's whatever number that we have, a third, 50-50 if it's 1/2, and things like that. And part of that is due to not having the roadmap ahead of where are things likely to go, and then being able to see that it's highly unlikely that we're going to be equal with how much we are each contributing to what we are doing. Another one of them is avoiding the difficult conversations. Even if you realize that my good friend is not going to be contributing as much as me, you're going to avoid bringing that up with him. I don't have the confidence in your being able to scale well. I think I'm going to have, in the technical talent, more value than your business talent. Other things like that you're not going to be willing to bring those up. And also, there's a lot of things that are anecdotes that get in the way of being able to make those the best stories. So for instance, one of my favorite examples is the founder of Zipcar. And there were two co-founders who were there. And Robin Chase, one of the founders, had heard an anecdote, a horror story from one of her mentors about how the equity split had torpedoed one of his highest potential ideas. They were fighting over the equity, didn't end up coming together, and the company never got founded. And so she decided, let me avoid having that kind of a problem. And so she teed it up right at the beginning and essentially said, let's get this out of the way. We should split 50-50. Agreed? They split 50-50. Robin's like, great, terrific to have that handshake taken care of. Yeah. Reflecting on it later on, her co-founder didn't come on board full time. was barely contributing the way that even close to what Robin was. Robin was crafting every part of the business plan, was crafting with going parking lot by parking lot to wrest a precious parking spot out of them, to put her Zipcar sign up in front of it and be able to park the car, et cetera, like blood, sweat, and tears put into the venture. And her co-founder benefiting equally financially because of the split. And Robin Chase being eaten up when she came to class to visit and talk about this. You could see it eating her up in her face, that she was having this bad split that she thought was the best handshake. She said it was the stupidest handshake that she had ever made. And so defaulting to that natural inclination, that is a very big hazard of doing it early on, also when it's all sorts of uncertainties. Now, all sorts of ways we can get into, like the ins and outs of how to be able to split far better. But the fundamental element of avoiding the difficult, defaulting to the equal, in uncertainty, making the bold assumption about a scenario of the world, not talking about the disaster scenarios of what if one of us is not coming on board full time? What if one of us, we've never found it, each of us, we don't know during the dark days of the venture, when the whole world is falling in on us, whether we're going to be able to persist through it. Like there's all sorts of things Robin didn't know about herself. Each one of the founders has to be protected from the other by being able to have a dynamic agreement rather than the static one. That is the natural inclination, and be able to put it in things like that. And so when it comes to be able to map that, on the one hand, there are some ways in which equality can be good if it is talked about, if it is a conscious equality. There are 50-50 splits that I will sign off on. When my students or other founders come to me and say, we split 50-50, I'll delve into it. I'll make sure that they had the difficult conversation, that they mapped the roles, the capabilities are taken care of, the uncertainties in the future, et cetera, and things like that. But other than that, just defaulting to blind equality is a problem, and it's going to harm the efficiency, because Robin could have done without the angst, could have been more focused, could have been able to have a lot more of her attention and paid to it without the distraction and other things along those lines. There's also some things, this gets into the nexus of roles and rewards. There's actually a student who put this on my radar and was talking about like some of the benefits. There's actually a student who kicked off my writing the book. Life as a Startup was because of this conversation with that student, where with his newlywed wife, they had been very focused on equality within the family. And so each night they were taking turns cooking and cleaning, and then they would swap the next night. And they would also be watching the scoreboard. Have we been equal on this? Have we been able to split these and things like that? And he said, I'm actually pretty good at cleaning, and she's really good at cooking. We're ending up with half the time burnt food and half the time a dirty apartment. So the equality is not working for us. And so the efficiency was harmed and things like that. And he took the lesson away from founders about play to your strengths. Don't focus on the scoreboard. Have it be approximately that you're each putting in the amount that the other one is, but the equality part is going to mislead you in a lot of ways. And so playing to their strengths, they were able to architect a much more efficient and effective household. And so there's one of the examples where we can see the echoes.
No, that makes sense for couples and relationships. One would hope to me, it makes sense. One, you play to your strengths, and everybody doesn't have to do everything, at least all of the time. Maybe everybody has to do everything some of the time. I would think the scoreboard watching is definitely unhealthy for a personal relationship, maybe even a little bit more than a founding relationship on the exact part. One part I found interesting, though, in the book, and I think it definitely relates to real life, is if you're thinking about how do we have more or less equality, it doesn't have to be in any given week, month, or year. There could be stretches of time where one person's skill set in starting up a business is much more valuable, stretches of time where the other person's skill set is much more valuable. I think that also translates well into home life.
No, absolutely. If you have that one of the two is in school while the other one is working, well, keep in mind that might flip. For me and my wife, the same kind of thing happened. While she was doing residency, I was working. Then I wanted to go back for my MBA. She was then working as an attending, as a doctor. The tag team, going back and forth, it has to be the bigger picture, the longer term that you're keeping in mind, not the right now, or at least for this next phase. What is the equality or the inequality that's happening?
Yep, absolutely. Relating to that, are there tips from the book then or tips from founders can provide on partners, spouses, on splitting up domestic tasks? Is it playing to the strengths? Is there a little bit more to that?
So I would actually put it, let's go back into, I guess, the need, can, and want framework.
Yeah.
Make the list of all the things that you need to do that collectively as a family, we need to be able to do. If there is, find the tasks that one of the two of you has both the can and the want. I'm good at it and I want to do it. And those would be the first ones that you put into that person's column. For the other person, the can and the want and things like that. And then when you get into what is left, that's where you're going to have a little bit more of the dialogue about, is someone good enough to be able to do it and is fine with doing it? And then you'll be able to assign that to that person. Over time, you can take a look at, are we in general in the same ballpark? There's not everything loading up into the one person's task and other things like that. There might be some other solutions that come out. If you don't have for one of the tasks, no can and no want for either of you, maybe outsource it. Maybe for that, you go and find someone who can, if it's the cleaning, get someone who's gonna be able to come in and clean for you because neither of you is good at it and want to do it or other things like that. There are other examples we can come up with.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Any other, I asked a few questions here. Anything else you might want to comment on like the lessons that founders could teach the audience watching this?
I think some of it is around, so a couple of things that you were talking about on the founding team side with when this succeeds. Scenario planning is being a critical thing, especially for founders in your passion, in your early confidence. You're going to be looking at the success scenarios. A critical thing is the plan around what happens when we don't hit all success, what happens when disaster hits, what happens when other scenarios hit. So forcing yourself to look beyond the rosy and be able to see what would it mean if we hit that scenario for what we might be able to do now proactively, to be able to build towards it, be able to have ourselves anticipate and avoid the problem. If the problem comes, how might we be able to get stronger from failure? Another one of the key arenas of the founders who are able to, usually failure is a failure. If you can get stronger from it, then it's not failure. Yep. And how do entrepreneurially we take that entrepreneurial mindset to be able to have the strengthening exercise happen well, rather than the recoil around failure, we ditch that effort, we don't learn from it. And then the next time we're in that situation, we make the same mistake again. How instead can we set ourselves up to learn from it, be able to get stronger, and then second round that we are able to say that was productive rather than a devastating failure.
Yeah. I read your book shortly. I finished it shortly before kind of launching. I'm piloting a podcast with Jadrian Wooten. He's the head of undergraduate economics at Virginia Tech, and so it's Economics Happy Hour is the term of is the name of the podcast. And it was really, the book was incredibly helpful just in terms of thinking through. We had several conversations ahead of time that I don't think I would have had. Just on, I have no idea where this will end up going, but how are we going to think about where does it get where does the content get posted? How do we share? What are the various tasks that we're doing? And it's not that we're both doing everything. We've got a little bit of a specialization on how we're doing. And right now there's no revenue involved in this at all. The dream would be it gets that big, right? That would be awesome. And so we had a few initial conversations about, we haven't had any sort of formal agreements on what do we do if we all of a sudden started bringing in revenue. That'd be a good problem to have. But those conversations would happen down the line, probably start to look at the splits on, okay, how much time are we putting in? Is what happens if we go from every other week to weekly? And what happens if we're both not on the podcast on the same week? Instead of us talking to each other, what happens if we're all of these various things, but incredibly helpful. So I highly recommend your book to anybody, really, for any reason. I thought it was a really entertaining read and thought-provoking read. But if you've got big decisions or big changes possibly coming up, I thought it was an incredible read.
No, thank you so much. It's a great example, I guess, of learning how to skate where the puck is going to be.
Yeah,
that's where being able to get that roadmap, being able to see a lot of the lessons and best practices, a lot of the ways in which we have to think differently than our natural inclinations. And so it was a great execution. It's a great example within your podcast for that. You essentially were dealing with 2 out of the 3 R's and both possibly having the third R kick in eventually, and being able to front load it even unto themselves. Each of those conversations was important. And it also now built your difficult conversation muscles with him for when the unexpected happens and when other things come up. And so either way, you guys are a stronger team for having executed on it.
No, and I think they're good. And they honestly, they weren't even difficult. The one thing I would say is I think you could build in your head that conversations could be difficult. These weren't difficult. They were like, we just needed to have them. They're like, okay, let's make sure we're kind of thinking about these things and who does what and how does it happen. And but it was really powerful. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. The book helped me, and I know for those who are watching, it could be very helpful. So
yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Thanks for mentioning it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, Noam, any closing words of wisdom for the audience?
I think we've covered loads of it. I would just go back to where we started about understanding where to inject the head in when you are following the heart. That's to apply every day of our lives in a lot of ways. Be able to understand where we need to get more informed about a path ahead, about a decision that we're making, about a relationship that we're engaged in, and then also around like this self-awareness that underlies the interpersonal. The more that we can really understand ourselves, reflect on it, get feedback on it about, in this team, how were we a little bit suboptimal, not just looking for the confirming evidence, but the disconfirming evidence that it was going well. That's where we can be able to have a lot more of a solidity of our knowledge of ourselves that will then underlie the interpersonal.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you. Thank you, Noam, for joining us. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. For those watching who may not have seen this before, once again, my name's Matt Rosu. I try to make videos regularly on economics and business lessons and make them accessible. And until the next time, we'll see you in the next video.